Colin Tennant, The Falling Bud, Chapter 12. Several police officers dressed in deep blue uniforms, white helmets and belts stood guard at the entrance of the court, and one sat behind the judge. The guards and the spectators seemed like actors in a game of death, played on a dim, dank and hostile stage. Despite the heat in the streets, the cold atmosphere of the courtroom suggested only power and remoteness. But Colin Tennant did not feel the cold. Relaxed and confident, he looked serenely at the judge, who seemed proud to be in the presence of a white English milord. Indeed, no change was apparent in his features, despite the discomfort he felt when his eyes turned from Judge Matthew to Michael. He was, in fact, distinctly irritated that the young man had made it to court at all, for he had been confident that the summons he had delivered at the airport would not be taken seriously. But now that Judge Matthew had opened the hearing, he knew that his plans must be adjusted to meet the new circumstances. Indeed, he had already discussed with Revere how to turn the situation to his advantage, so as to complete his plan to acquire the house and land. As he listened to Revere skillfully explaining the case, Tennant calculated the effect his own presence was having on a dark-skinned judge. It pleased him that Revere was playing his part so well, as he proclaimed that his client Tennant was a God-fearing man with a genuine love and care for his manservant Adonai. Surely his purchase of land was equally a proof of the devotion that the servant had returned to his employer. Tennant had little doubt that this explanation would be accepted, for he knew how deep the belief was held by the older generation that the whiter you are, the closer you are to God. The colonial mentality was still strong among the privileged. Confident that the judge's decision would favor Adonai, Tennant nevertheless prayed that his construction of a swimming pool and a road would not be questioned. He needed the road especially to facilitate the transport of cocaine from the pitons to his clients in Castries, thereby avoiding the sea police patrols, which were becoming more efficient in stopping and searching the canoes used by the drug dealers. As Revere went on speaking, Tennant's face was expressionless, but he felt sure that the judge was more interested in him than in anything being said by mere legal underlings in court. However, when Revere told the judge that his client had been prevented from enjoying property for which he had paid good money, Michael rose to his feet to denounce the crafty lawyer by declaring, "Your Honour, it was I, Michael Jacques, who invited Tennant to Soufrière to visit Revere, who was at that time not only my lawyer, but the long-term friend of my family, for which he had worked on property matters." Judge Matthews, taken by surprise, remained frozen a while as he digested the new turn of events. Perhaps his adulation of the white aristocrat was ill-founded. Silence fell on the court while everyone awaited his reply. He drew in a deep breath as though to clear the troubled brain concealed beneath the matted grey hair on his head. Then his gaze travelled slowly from Revere to Michael and back to Revere before he said, "You had both better come to my office." There the judge listened to both parties' arguments again before giving them 3 days in which to resolve their differences. In the light of Judge Matthew's direction, Revere invited Michael to his office a short distance away. In the street, Michael repeated his demand for a copy of the sales agreement, insisting that without it the sale was off. Michael also reminded Little Goat that the sale was to Tennant, not to his manservant, as Revere had lied to the judge. Further, he reminded the duplicitous crafty lawyer of a second handwritten document that he had signed in June 1989 at Linton Lamontaine's family bakery in Soufrière town. This indicated that Tennant had realized the sales agreement was not legally binding and had sent Lamontaine that evening to find him. Tennant had then promised him an extra $100,000 to pay for a piece of land on which he had deposited $10,000 in Soufrière town. Revere titled this document for the avoidance of doubt, and he had signed it to help Tennant build a road to Jalousie, ostensibly to help St. Lucia. Revere made a half-concealed threat that as Michael was alone on the island and his family were no one special, things could be made very difficult for him if he did not toe the line. Michael replied that maybe he was alone, but that did not mean that anyone could bully and defraud him. He refused to go to Little Goat's office as they had nothing more to discuss, and took the bus from Castries back to Soufrière, where since renting his guest house to Tennant, he had taken a room at the home hotel. Though he had not been invited to Chambers to discuss the issue, the next day Tennant invited Judge Matthews for lunch at an expensive restaurant. There, as though he was speaking to a loyal subject, he told the judge most condescendingly that he believed that the peaceful island of St. Lucia was still admirably managed by a really able administration. His words seemed to imply that the island continued the legacy of the British Empire, though in fact it had gained its independence in 1979. Of course, Judge Matthew was suitably impressed by the noble lord's concern for his country. On the third day, Revere and Michael met, as instructed, in Judge Matthew's chambers, but without reaching agreement. The judge acknowledged the conflict of interest and postponed the hearing. Tennant, intent on chastising Michael for his obstinacy, stopped paying the agreed guest house monthly rent in the hope that without that income he would be unable to pursue his legal case. Michael saw through the game and recognized that he could not fight the crooked pair on two fronts, the lease agreement and the sales issue, decided to concentrate on the second, whatever the cost.